Almost every family walks into results day expecting one of two things, an offer or a rejection, in or out. And I want to say up front, I think that expectation is actually what causes most of the unnecessary stress in the weeks that follow, not just the outcome itself. It's generally not that simple. And where I see a lot of families trip up the most by far is the reserve list. For anyone who's newer to the channel, my name is John, and I'm the founder of Bing's Academy. We've been doing one-on-one tutoring that's online for the Selective High School NOC for over 10 years now, as well as school tutoring on top as well. I've sat on the other side of the result like this. So I know how much weight one dashboard message can end up carrying in a household. I didn't make it into OC, but I did make it into selective school. Quickly on what this actually is, this is the main Year 7 entry test that students sit in Year 6, run by the Department of Education and decided purely on the exam itself. There's no interview. It's a very different process compared to Years 8 to 11 entry, which I did, but I've covered extensively in other videos, and this is not the topic for it, where outcomes are released by each individual school between September and October instead. Selective high school outcomes for this cycle is expected on the 19th of August, later this month. Opportunity class follows later, expected on the 9th of September, both listed as expected rather than confirmed. So I'll still check your own dashboard closer to the day for the exact result, as the days can be varied over time. So the first thing we'll actually say, and I think the most important one, stop treating the reserve list as a maybe. No. Quickly, the basic shape of it is if your child qualifies for a school and it's the highest one they qualify for, that's an offer. And any lower preference they have qualified for just shows it's not applicable. That's not a rejection. It's not really applicable once a higher one's already come through. Reserve means still generally in the running, behind students offered a place first. And here's what I think most families get wrong about. It's entirely possible to hold an accepted offer at one school while sitting on the reserve list for a higher preference at the same time. There's an actual reserve decision date governing how long you can keep both. And if the reserve position actually comes through first, accepting it automatically drops the offer you were holding previously as you're accepting the higher preference school. I think of a family from my last year who held an offer at their second preference and assumed reasonably that the reserve position at their first choice was basically dead once a few weeks had passed with no update. It hadn't. Selective reserve offers can generally keep coming through right up until the end of term 1 the following school year. For opportunity class, it's the end of term 1 in Year 6. So this isn't a 2-week window, it's closer to a full term. And the dashboard actually shows a reserve band, an estimation of when an offer might land based on where similar positions end up the previous year. I'll treat this as a genuine guide, not a promise, as every year in every school, the number of people who reject or accept an offer can vary. But it is based off last year's pattern, not this year's guarantee. Also, don't want to swing too far the other way and tell every reserve family to just relax and just wait it out. I don't have visibility into how an individual school's list is moving each and every year, and there's no reserve list at all for a small number of schools like Aurora College. So just check your dashboard reserve band rather than going off what happened to someone else's results and their student. The second thing worth knowing, especially if you've been through this with an older child, is that the report itself won't tell you the same story it used to. It doesn't hand back a raw mark over anymore. What you get instead places your child in one of 4 bands per test component: the top 10%, the next 15%, next 25%, or the bottom 50%. No percentage correct, no school mark, no individual score, no rank, no published cutoff for any school either is applicable anymore. I actually don't think this is a design choice that holds up. The department's reasoning is that the publishing the exact scores is encouraging unhealthy competition between kids, and the test was never meant to double as a curriculum diagnostic anyway. So if you're expecting the same kind of number that an older sibling did years ago, then that comparison isn't really available to you this time. And I don't think there's a flaw in the system, but I would have liked it to be a lot more upfront and transparent, and I personally prefer the older system. The third thing, and probably the most practical, is what I'll actually tell you to depends on which of these actually land. If it's an offer, there's a genuine response due date to accept or decline it. Missing it loses the offer outright, so action it early rather than assume that there's plenty of time. And accepting isn't the finish line either. You get an email for online enrollment with its own 2-week window. If it's unsuccessful, and I will pretend it's a generally hard message to receive, Every New South Wales public school runs its own high potential and gifted education support. Some schools have the gifted and talented stream, and that might be an option you want to consider, or you might want to consider which non-fully selective high schools you want to get into for the future. And you could always pursue transferring in years 8 to 11, as that's a pathway open down the line, whether it's HAST, EduTest, or a school's own custom exam, depending on where you're aiming. Something that I've gone through probably in a few different videos. And if that's something that's relevant to your family or situation. But whatever happens, the reports your child brings home from here can still count. They don't reset to zero because this particular result wasn't the one you wanted. And whichever of these you're looking for, there is a formal appeals process, and I can actually be quite specific about it rather than just hedge. It typically needs to be lodged about 5 business days of outcomes being released. No late submissions, and I think it's worth going in with realistic expectations about what is actually it's going for, and it's not there to remark a paper or reconsider a result that you're actually disappointed by. It's generally a narrow, documented illness, a misadventure on the day, or you really disagree about the process which worked out, especially for writing. You want that to be reviewed. I want to say specifically for families waiting on opportunity class rather than selective, since I don't want this to read as something that I've forgotten about you about, is you have your own day. OC is a more contained process. It only runs for years 5 and year 6, so there's less long-term implications to reposition afterwards the way selective has all the way to year 12, plus the years 8 to 11 transfer pathway on top of that. Everything I've gone through, how to actually think about the reserve list, the reserve mechanics, the report, applies the same way to OC, just its own timeline, and that OC has an additional preference that you can choose on top. I also want to be upfront about the one thing before I wrap up. Whether you end up with your highest preference, a second or a third, or even your fourth, further down your list, a reserve position that later turns into an offer or nothing at all, what you actually want to do is generally looks different for each of those. It's not something this video is about though. This one's about understanding what the outcome itself actually means. The follow-up on what I would actually do in each specific scenario is a big enough topic on its own that it might be in another video or in a guide rather than a few lines tacked onto the end of this video. But if you are curious, write it down in the comments and I can individually respond to you. I think the honest takeaway is that if you're expecting going into matters more than people realize. It's not just an offer or rejection the way it feels like it should be. I'd rather a family understand the real shape of it going in than spend weeks reading meaning into how it actually works. Whichever of these lands for your families, it's just one data point in a much longer academic journey. Students can be extremely successful not even getting into a selective high school, and I know many students that can actually get into a selective high school later down the line. Or maybe if they go to a normal public school, they can do really well too. If you enjoyed this video, let me know down in the comments below. And I think it's very important to think about it as if you're on the reserve list or if you didn't make it into anything, one thing you can really think about is for the HAST exam or EduTest, if you're trying out in year 7, they look at your year 6 report and everything you've done. So don't think about it as, okay, so I didn't make it in August, I'm on the reserve list, and in September onwards, you do nothing at all, because that's something you might actually want to consider next year. But if you're 100% certain you don't want to ever consider it again, then you can kind of relax and chill out, right? The test was in May, but I think it's also a good opportunity to prepare for high school, which is a whole nother journey. Thank you so much for watching and staying to the end. Like this video if you haven't. If you wanted me to cover a similar topic or something else entirely, let me know as well down in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.